Hey, everybody, it's Gene Marks again. Thank you very much for coming back and joining me on another episode of BizBooks. Whether you're listening or watching us on YouTube, I'm really happy to have you here. I'm also very happy to have Karin Hurt and David Dye here, who are both the co-authors of Courageous Cultures, How to Build Teams of Micro-Innovators, Problem Solvers, and Customer Advocates. Karin and David, thank you guys both for joining me.
Oh, it's absolutely our pleasure.
Yep.
Delighted to be with you.
Thrilled to have you guys here. And David, I was attracted to your name only because I grew up in Philadelphia. There used to be a DJ named David Dye, late night classic rock.
Well acquainted with Mr. David Dye. It took me many years to get on the front page of my own name on SEO, search engines for that name. So yeah,
I'm sure you've heard of the guy and you've been cursing him ever since.
I got to tell you, one time I went into a thing and the lady said, "I love your show." I said, "It's not me." She said, "Oh no, there's lots of famous people here. You can be yourself." I said, "It's still not me," and I had to pull out my driver's license to prove it.
That's really funny. Yeah, it's not a common name, but again, if you're a fan of his, I don't even know if the guy's still around. I mean, I used to listen to him when I was a kid, like in the 70s. So for all
he retired 3 years ago.
Okay. Well, you know more about him than the average person. Fair enough. Okay. So let's find out a little bit about yourselves and get up to the book and why you wrote it. So Karin, I'll start with you. Give us a little background. Tell us who you are.
Yeah, so David and I run a company called Let's Grow Leaders. We're all about practical tools and techniques for human-centered leaders. We've been doing this for a little over a decade. And we are known for really just practical, people, whether it's a keynote, they read our book, they take a training program, they say, you know what, that was really practical. Yeah. And at first we're like, I'm not sure that we want to be the practical ones, but as it turns out, that is very helpful. But before founding Let's Grow Leaders, I was at Verizon for 20 years. And spent the first decade in human resources, leadership development, did a lot of merger integration work, and then led a variety of operations teams. So I led a 2,200 person sales team, a 10,000 person customer service organization. And, the reason I start with that is I think that's where the practical comes from. So every tool that we build is grounded in something that we learned the hard way.
Yeah, it's interesting also that you bring up the practical side of it, because you're right. There are a lot of authors and a lot of speakers that talk 30,000 foot overview or, big picture or whatever. And this book gives you specific strategies, things for empowering employees, things for, developing ethics and integrity, increasing communication and feedback, but like specific practical ideas for implementing these things in an organization. It was really, I appreciated that very much. So it came across. So that's great. And David, how about you?
Yeah, so my background, I spent my career in human services, and I started, frontline and held every leadership position there is to hold in that arena, all the way up to CEO of a national organization, and really got into leadership development early. I'm the oldest of 6 kids, and that really was the start for me of how do you bring a group of people together and how do we do something bigger than ourselves? And so I started asking those questions pretty early in life, and through my career was able to do a lot of investment in helping managers, leaders grow and become the best version of themselves. Eventually started blogging because I couldn't get to everybody individually anymore. And Karin as well started blogging. That's how we met and realized that we really had alignment around our approach message, that practicality aspect of things and the human-centered element of our leadership development.
What is the name of your company again?
Let's Grow Leaders.
Let's Grow Leaders. And where are you guys based? Are you both in the same locale? I mean, you're here now, but are you in the same?
Yeah, so we're married. Okay. And we live in Laurel, Maryland, which is halfway between Baltimore and Washington, D.C.
Got it. And I just have to ask, so first of all, I know Laurel well. I'm in Philadelphia. So my daughter is a University of Maryland grad. And so you guys met through all of this. Is that what you were saying, David? And now you guys are married.
That
Awesome.
is the case. Yes. Yeah. We met each other through our leadership writing, and that's how we first got to know each other, then decided to collaborate on our first book. And I was living in Denver at the time. Karin was here and wrote the book. It was coming out, and we had got to be really good friends, both also single, and realized there was something more there than just co-authors and that friendship. And so we were able to merge our businesses, and here we are.
So if you're looking for true love after 40, write a book.
I was about to say, who needs Tinder or Hinge? You know, I mean, it's much better to just blog and write a book, and you're going to find. And you know what's really funny is that it kind of makes sense because you know, depending on the topic that you specialize in, you're going to draw other people that are also have the same interests, and who knows, sparks could flare as they did with you guys. So this book was written in 2020. You know, so it was actually when it was published in 2020. So I'm assuming you guys are writing this prior to the pandemic,
Yeah.
right? I mean, it was coming along. So
That's
Karen,
correct.
I'll start with you. I mean, right now, as we're talking here in 2023, the whole topic of culture is just it's huge. You know, obviously because of the whole work from home, remote working, people trying to figure out what makes sense. I just you know, I just did a report recently about how like even like you know Mark Zuckerberg at Facebook, he was all about oh, we're gonna have everybody working from home in 5 years, and that's the kind of company we're gonna be. And now, just recently, he's like, I made a mistake. We need to get people back in the office.
Mhm.
You know, and the same thing over at Mark Benioff at Salesforce saying the same thing. And culture is critical. This was before you wrote this book, though, before COVID. I'm kind of curious, like you must be just inundated with requests about this topic
You
because of
know,
what's happened to COVID.
yeah, I mean, it's interesting because when we first, when the pandemic hit, right as we were launching the book, we're like, all of our keynotes, all the book sales went away, and I thought
Yeah.
this is a disaster. But as it turns out, the book turned out to be very timely. You know, it was interesting because we were working with a variety of organizations all over the world and noticing a consistent pattern. When we would work with the most senior executives, we would hear things like, why don't more people speak up? Why am I the person that goes in and discovers the best practice when there's somebody like 3 cubes over is doing something really good? Why aren't they talking to each other? Why aren't people sharing their ideas?
Yeah.
But then we would go in to do training at the front line of those same organizations. And when we would hear things like, nobody really wants my ideas. The last time I spoke up, I got in trouble. No, nobody does anything with this anyway, so why bother? So that's what triggered the research because we were like, why is this happening? Because employees have ideas and most leaders really do want to hear them. And somehow there was a disconnect. So we partnered with the University of North Colorado to ask a couple of questions. When people were holding back ideas, what kind of ideas were they holding back? And they weren't trivial. They were holding back ideas to improve the customer experience, the employee experience, or productivity in a process. And then, we did the research to say, well, why? And so, we can get into that, but that's what sparked us to write this book because we saw a real business need. And, of course, it starts with psychological safety and all of
Sure.
those ground that everybody's talking about psychological safety, but how do you make that practical? How do you create an environment where people really do feel like they know how and have the confidence and competence to share their ideas? Because that's what builds culture is when people feel like they are part of something bigger.
Sure.
And I think
And by the way, I was just to interrupt both of you guys. So I know, David, you're about to speak. My plan is I'll go back and forth between you guys, asking questions. If there's anything that I ask that maybe isn't like you feel like the other person could answer it better, feel free to deflect back, which is completely fine. But David, you were going to add to what Karen was saying. Go ahead.
Just in terms of your question regarding the response in culture and the pandemic, I think the critical thing and the reason that the book was so successful and that message has resonated so much is that question is bigger than any of us. It's bigger than any one leader. And the more voices that we're able to draw into those conversations and get all the parallel processing of all of the brains in our companies and organizations and teams working together on those answers, the better solutions we find. And so creating a culture where that becomes the norm is an advantage.
Right. Okay. Let's talk about psychological safety. I mean, you bring it up, and Karen, it is not something that honestly in your world it might seem like very common vernacular, but it really wasn't to me. Can you explain what that is?
Yeah. Do you want to take that?
Sure. So when we're talking about psychological safety, it's that feeling that I am not just allowed, but welcomed to speak the truth in a group setting, to speak my truth, to put something forward that may not be popular or whatever else. But it's not just that I'm not going to be punished for it. It's that it's actually welcomed into that. So that's in the most concise way when I'm experiencing psychological safety as a member of a team. It's that invitation for me to speak up and to put my truth in the conversation.
How do you get there?
So first you eliminate all of what we'll call the toxic courage crushers.
Right.
So shame, blame, intimidation. If you have any of that junk, the Me Too stuff going on in your company, and then you go and say, hey, we really want you to speak up and share your ideas. So that's not safe.
Right.
So that's the first thing. And then, Dr. Amy Edmondson is really considered to be the pioneer of psychological safety. She's at Harvard. She wrote the foreword to our book. And, she talks a lot about how all the research around psychological safety points to that people are more likely to hold onto a negative experience with speaking up than a positive one. And they're likely to discount the future benefits of speaking up and overweight the fear that they're feeling right now. And why that's so important is for people who are going to pick up this book, I assume they're human-centered leaders who really want to make this happen. So they're probably not leading in a way with shame, blame, and intimidation. But it is statistically likely that someone on their team has had that experience in the past and they're holding on to it. So you have to more than say it's okay. You have to proactively make it easy for them to contribute their ideas because you have to overcome those headwinds that we know exist.
What happens at Karen is that when you're in an organization, and this, and you've written about it, it's very easy for human beings to talk about other people, make fun of other people, joke around. Sometimes it's malicious, sometimes it's just poking fun. But at the same time, it still has an impact on somebody's willingness to offer information in the future and contribute. And again, a lot of this is just in your book. I'm curious, Karen, like just for our listeners, for our viewers. Saying that we want to provide that psychologically safe environment is one thing, providing it is another. So what advice do you have that you've given in this book that would help a manager or a business owner, for example, provide that sort of safe environment?
Yeah. So in the book, we go through 7 steps. I'm not going to go through all 7, but to start with, it really starts with first navigating the narrative, which is your own comfort level of speaking up. Because if you go to your team and say, oh, it's totally cool, I really want to hear your ideas, and they're watching you and you are all about the politics and you're do what we call diaper genie feedback, like, sandwiching the things that you really need to say in a way that you're really afraid to say them. They're watching all that. They're like, not safe. So that's the first step.
Right.
Then it's creating clarity. And this is clarity about 2 things. One, being really clear that you want your idea, but this is the other one that was really interesting in the research. It's clarity about what a good idea would accomplish. So do your people have enough strategic context to give good ideas? So when we were working with the tools at the beginning, we would test them in a couple of ways. One, we would go and say, okay, bring us any ideas you have to improve the business.
Right.
And the ideas we got were okay.
Right.
But they were either so big that they wouldn't be able to be doable. Like, oh, let's build a tiny house on this campus to solve our housing shortage at a university, right? Like, that's a good idea, but it's not something that anybody in that room had agency to actually make happen. Right? Or we said, let's give us ideas to accomplish this thing, this very specific thing. How do we be more productive while we're working from home? How do we help the mental health of our people? Whatever it is that you have agency over. When we were more specific, that's when you got really doable ideas. So that's creating clarity. And then
I want to jump in just to add to that. And David, I don't know if you have anything to add, but the concept there is when you have like a big problem, if you break it down into smaller challenges, and then you ask for input on how to deal with smaller challenges, it's much more clarified and more direct. And and I think that's what the point that you were making, in your book, right?
Yeah. So, so even let's just take something really personal. You could go to your team and say, do you have anything I could do to be a better leader?
Right.
Now, if you ask that, you're going to hear most likely, oh, you're doing great. No worries. No problem. But if you say, could you give me one way that I could make our meetings more effective? Right now, everybody's got an opinion.
Yeah.
It's that aspect. It's just, again, it's like human psychology. The more specific we can get, the more we're able to respond and wrap our head around it. And the other element is, when you're talking about clarity, do people really know where you're going, what you're trying to achieve, how their work fits into that? All of those elements, the more knowledge that any team member has about those things, the more insight and effective ideas that they can contribute. So then the next step is to cultivate curiosity.
Right.
And, when we would share these principles with leaders and managers, so often we would hear almost a default already thing from people who with really good hearts are like, everybody on my team knows I have an open door. They can bring me anything they want. Everybody knows that. And they really sincerely believed it. And it was probably true, but there's a problem there. So first, let's talk about the good part of an open door is from a safety valve and a way to deal with harassment or any of those kinds of issues. Yes, absolutely need that. But when you're talking about getting the innovations and the solutions to problems and good ideas from your team, the problem with an open door is twofold. One, it still takes initiative for somebody to walk through it.
Yep.
They've got to stop doing the work they're doing. And even if it's a metaphorical open door, like, logging into a Zoom meeting or scheduling an appointment with you,
Sure.
it still takes initiative. I got to stop what I'm doing and go and do that at the risk of it may or may not be received. What's going to happen? And most people in that situation just choose to keep doing their work. And the second problem,
and also, by the way, it gets noticed by other workers. Like, oh, what's she going in there, to talk to the boss about? You know what I mean? Like, it's like teacher's pet kind of thing.
You got all those kinds of issues. And then the second is that people don't know sometimes the ideas they had. And I share this story in the book, but where this really cemented for me was one time I was working I was the COO. I was working with our CEO and the CFO, and we were all trying to solve a significant problem that involved insurance changes and a bunch of, it was a big problem. And we had spreadsheets all over the office and figuring out a solution. We finally, after a couple hours of that, we crafted what we believe is a great solution. And I walked down the hall and I shared it kind of idly with an assistant who said, "Oh, okay. Yeah, I hear what you're saying. Interesting." And she immediately says, "Now, as I'm thinking about it, here's going to be the impact on this group, and here's going to be the impact on this group." And yeah, okay. And neither of those impacts were great. And she wasn't being critical. She was just thinking out loud about what was going to be the consequences, and made me realize we were not done coming up with the solution. And moreover, she needed to be a part of that conversation. But here is the crazy thing. She had really keen insights to share. She did not know that she had them to share until I asked. So as a leader, when we're talking about cultivating curiosity, it's proactively asking for the ideas that we need and the solutions that we want. If we passively wait for them to walk through our door, it's not going to happen. And people have a natural, as Karin shared, all of those natural impediments, those headwinds to speaking up in the first place, because sometimes they don't know. There's the friction. There's all of those elements that we talked about. So to go out and proactively ask is critical.
I just a quick story. I have a good friend and a client of mine actually, and him and two partners run it's like 150, 200 person company. And his office had to be redecorated. So he took 2 weeks and moved himself to a cubicle in the customer service area, among all the customer service reps that were there. And he said it was absolutely a game-changing thing, because he was not only watching them in action, but in a more relaxed atmosphere. He was asking them what they were doing. They were telling him, they were asking him questions. He was offering advice. They were offering advice to him. It was the opposite of a toxic behavior. It was a more welcome, and it dovetails back into some of the points that you're making about being open with your people. And he did this 5-6 years ago. And he says now every year he takes 1 or 2 or 3 weeks out of the year and moves his base to different areas of the company and just works from there, because he just feels like it's even better than an open door policy. I just thought
awesome.
it was a cool story. It was a really cool story.
It is.
It's a great example. So we share a number of different ways to cultivate curiosity, but that is a good example
Beautiful.
of a listening tour kind of a thing, where you're going and being in the and asking and talking. To perfect.
He's among the peeps, and there was a lot of feedback. Karin, what is a toxic leadership behavior?
So we talk about 3 in the book. There are so many, right? Where do I start? But shaming,
blaming, and intimidation.
I have this vivid memory, which is the COO gets in front of a group of very senior leaders. Okay, so very well paid executives, but puts a stack rank of all of their results up. And so they got 20 people's results, starts at the bottom of the list and passes the microphone around and says, explain to your peers why you're dragging down our results.
What a dick.
It was such, it was
Horrible.
so bad. And
Yeah.
everybody, I mean, you just could watch that. And
Yeah.
I really, really think she thought that was the thing to do,
Yeah.
because she's like, well, nobody wants to be that guy. Right.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but the downstream, right. So I'm in that room. Thank God I wasn't at the bottom of the list. But I mean, I'm just watching this and thinking, how could you do this to, the culture? And so, that's an extreme example, but, sarcasm, like they're trying to be funny, but if you were in a position of power and you are truly sarcastic, and the thing is, sometimes the most toxic things are done to people who you actually have a really good relationship with. That's what we're finding, like people who have, well, I can do that because they're just, I've known this guy forever and it's all cool, but everybody else is watching and going, oh my goodness,
Or sometimes, familiarity breeds contempt, and you
Yeah.
have an expectation of that person that you're very familiar with and have worked with a long time. And you might expect better. You might expect a better idea, or that they would understand or have more wisdom or whatever it is. And sometimes when that doesn't happen, the contempt that can come out in that. So it's really something, those are things you have to pay attention to, because if it takes courage for somebody just to show up, you're never going to get their best thinking.
Yeah.
They're spending all their energy just showing up.
It's funny you guys mentioned about the sarcasm or whatever, but you just, as you get higher and higher up the food chain in an organization, you make comments and people read into those comments, and even if you're just joking around, some people don't take it as a joke, and other people are like, well, I know he said it was a joke, but if he said it, there might be something, something in there.
Yeah.
You just have to be super careful, when you're doing that stuff. Otherwise, it really does. You're right. It does become toxic. One of the other, you give a bunch of different mistakes, both of you guys, for for other sort of things that leaders screw up. One of it, and I guess David, I'll turn to you on this one, is chronic restructuring. And I was wondering if you can sort of expand on why you think, why is that such a mistake?
Well, Karin has more direct experience with
Okay.
the chronic restructuring, so I'm going to give that one to her. But you create so much turmoil, people can't get their feet underneath them. Again, you're never going to get the best ideas because people are just busy surviving.
Yeah. And, I think the other thing is when you restructure your most important things, which is what, we talk about, change constantly. And so if my priorities are, if I think, well, why bother? Because the priorities are going to change again. Or why invest in developing this team? Because as a team, because I'm not going to be with them. And I have seen that chronic restructuring really does create a level of uncertainty. And maybe your organization could be better if it was just a little bit, and get it right. But you're better off sticking with it, unless it's a disaster, than to keep changing your mind and keep changing it and leaving everybody with that uncertainty. The other mistake that I feel like we ought to get in is failure to respond to ideas. And I know that this is one of David's favorites. So.
Yeah, that next step after you cultivate curiosity and all the different ways to ask and get ideas, the linchpin, the capstone and the arch of all of this is how you respond to the ideas that you do get, because you're going to get a range of them.
Yeah.
You're going to get one of our favorite examples. We're working with a large financial institution. They had a really robust way of collecting ideas from every level of the organization. And we talked to the executive in charge about it. And he said, what's interesting is that half of the ideas we get are things we're already doing. The person's just not aware. We said, oh, okay, well, gosh, they must feel really heard then at the end of the day and he said, oh, no, that's not what our internal pulse surveys are showing. We said, okay, well, how are you going back and telling people, hey, that idea was so good, it's already being done, and here's where you can learn more. And he said, oh, that would be a good idea, wouldn't it? Well, think about what's happening for that person who took the time to enter into the system, think their idea through, put it in the system in the way it needed to be, all of that, and then never hears boo about it again. Well, what's going on in their head? Well, it's cementing all those things we talked about earlier. No one really wants my ideas. Nothing's going to change. They're stuck in their way of thinking. I'm not going to bother. But none of it's true. Right. None of that was true, but it's how it's perceived. So how we respond is critical. So that's an example of the idea has already been implemented, but you also
Sure.
have ideas that you can't use or that are half baked.
So what do you do?
Or maybe, yeah,
So what
maybe
do you
you
do?
have an
What
idea.
is what do you recommend that managers and leaders do to,
Yeah.
appropriately respond?
We call it respond with regard. And there are just 3 steps in it. And the same 3 steps, regardless of the kind of idea: gratitude, information, and an invitation. So gratitude is not gratitude for the idea. The idea may be a dumb idea. So you don't want to say, hey, that's a great idea if it's
Mhm.
not.
Mhm.
What you want to have gratitude for is the fact that they were thinking and contributing.
Sure.
So, hey, thank you so much for thinking about how we can be better.
Sure.
Then you add information depending on the idea. Maybe it's, hey, we can't do this because it would take us this way. We're going this way. Maybe it's, hey, here's some more information that would be helpful as you're thinking this through.
Mm.
Maybe it's, we're already doing that, and here's where you can learn more. Thank you for contributing.
Right.
And then you end with that invitation to continue contributing.
Right.
Love to get your thoughts on. Maybe it's that same idea with more information. Maybe it's a different idea. Maybe it's where you really need a good idea, and you're clarifying that. So you're coaching their thinking, but encouraging them for contributing in the first place, and adding information to help them be as effective as they can.
Do you recommend any form of communication? Do you tell your clients, it's always best to, speak to them face to face or on the phone as opposed to sending an email, or maybe emails are satisfactory?
You know what I want to talk about, but so it depends on the idea,
depends.
right? For when you're responding. But what we really believe about communication for the clarity element of things is that if something is critically important, if you want people to understand this is where you're headed strategically, if there's a behavior that you really want, if you're wanting to communicate that you really want people's ideas, you want to communicate it 5 times, 5 different ways. So maybe way one
Wow.
is you bring everybody to an in-person town hall meeting. Maybe way two is you follow up with an email. Then you follow up in the one-on-ones with each person and say, what are you picking up? Why do you think this is important? Then maybe you build a recognition program. Maybe you sing a little song and do a little skit, something that is capturing people's attention. Because the very fact that people are like, wow, I have heard this recently. I have heard it again and again, repeated. There's some emotional appeal to this. I'm having to recall what I'm hearing in this what we call a check for understanding. That can really make a difference.
A lot of
Karin, it's like you spend
neuroscience
time
in
on
there.
Madison Avenue or something. Isn't that like, like a person has to see an ad something like 12
7
times?
times.
7 times right before it sinks
Yeah.
in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
David, what were you going to say?
Yeah, there's a lot of neuroscience in that if we want people internalizing those core concepts, those critical messages that are critical to our success, that's why 5 times 5 different ways.
Fascinating. And it's funny. I mean, it's no different than sales, is it? I mean, if it's an idea that you think is worth it, you are trying to sell it to your organization. You want people to buy in and understand it. And like any salesperson, good salesperson will tell you, when they're reaching out to prospects, they're emailing them, they're going on LinkedIn, they're calling them, they're maybe sending them a postcard. They're trying to hit them from different directions, like your 5 different ways with that similar message. And I guess it's a similar type of approach, which makes a lot of sense.
There's just a lot of noise, right?
Yes.
And I'm fascinated that, if you go to our website, it is pretty obvious that we have a book called Courageous Cultures. People will Google I'm getting deep into a sales presentation, and then I'll say, so are you familiar with our book? You have a book? Oh, wait, it's in my signature that we have been communicated for the last 3 weeks, right? You can't see, it's on my cover of my LinkedIn, right?
Don't even get me started, Karen. One of my pet peeves is I can't regularly. I will have email exchanges with people that I know or that have responded before that I've met, and they'll call me Mark, not Gene. Like there's right. It's like, it'll be like, we would have had a thing, and then the person will respond by saying, hey, thanks a lot, Mark. Look forward to seeing you. Something like that. There is, so in defense of the people that might not be noticing, like,
Yep.
I think there is some kind of a synapse going on in people's brains, depending on the type of information they're seeing.
Yeah.
And we do see a lot of noise. We're processing it sometimes too fast. People see Gene Marks and their brain just skips to Mark.
Yeah. And
Which I think embellishes your approach, which is to hit them from different directions, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, think about a work environment, the number of different conversations, priorities, meetings, all of the information just at work that's flying at people all the time.
Yeah.
In order to get something really internalized and stick, it takes time and repetition and different ways of communicating.
Yep. So as you guys have probably figured out by now, like there's like I've read your entire book. We're going to cover like 10% of it because we're talking about some of the main concepts that are in it. But I do want to leave a lot for our listeners and our viewers to go and see for themselves and buy the book. But having said that, I'll flip back to you, David. And again, feel free to toss this over to Karen if you think. But you do write about something called navigating the narrative, which I found interesting. Are you comfortable talking about that?
Yeah.
Go for it.
Absolutely. So the navigating the narrative really is starting with you as a leader. So as Karin shared earlier in our conversation, people are looking at you, and are you modeling the courage and the contribution that you are asking of them? So getting comfortable with your own relationship to courage, to speaking up, to psychological safety, all of those things. Where we see courageous culture efforts break down is frequently, and why that gap exists, it's often at the level of the team leader or middle manager. So you've got maybe your senior executive who's saying, yes, we need everybody's idea. And we've seen this in organizations. And and they're asking and they're doing, and then you get to that middle level manager who has all their own insecurities, and they're worried about somebody else getting credit, and they're not. And so they're shutting down ideas, or they're stealing credit for other people's ideas, which incidentally was one of the most fascinating parts of all that research that we did was 56% of people said, if I were to not share an idea, the reason is I would worry I'm not going to get credit for it. Right. That's astounding. And we'll share that in a keynote or in a workshop or something. And you can watch the sea of heads go, it's like, it's a shared experience. And so that navigating the narrative is all about tapping into your own moments of courage. We all have them. And so where have you acted courageously in your own career, and centering yourself in that so that you are showing up in that way? And then the other piece of this that I think is important for leaders everywhere is vulnerability. There's a tool that we use in cultivating curiosity. We encourage leaders to ask what we call a courageous question.
Right.
And a courageous question is specific and it's vulnerable.
Right.
It's specific the way that Karin was talking about earlier, very narrow topic. I'm just asking for one thing.
Right. But
it's vulnerable because it assumes improvement is possible. And when I'm asking a question as a leader, there is an implication that I don't have the answer.
Right.
Or I may have an answer, but it's not the answer. And for many leaders, that actually takes courage to put themselves in that way. And yet it's completely silly hubris to think you're going to have all the answers to everything. So being able to tap into our own courage and get vulnerable that way is critical if we're going to be this kind of leader.
You give a good example, and I would love you to just embellish a little bit here as you tell the story of Trader Joe's and you talk about vulnerability. I mean, particularly your story of waiting in line for so long, and some cashier that was like being like an MC at a cabaret show, giving out free kombucha and ice cream, and now Trader Joe's also shares, is very transparent. I'm curious if one of you guys want to talk a little bit about that, just because you're talking about asking those courageous questions.
Yeah, so you have to create an environment. So I don't think that would happen at the Giant or Safeway or Kroger, right? Because so basically, this person felt empowered. There was a huge pending snowstorm, so it was like, if anybody's been in a Trader Joe's, those are not big stores, right?
No. So and they're always chaos. They're always chaos.
Yeah, it's chaos. And so, we are in this line that is like running down the aisle past the frozen foods, snaking into the thing, and people are just like, yeah. And so they have this microphone, which was cool, and it gets on there and he just starts making jokes and says, okay, we're going to count off. We're going to go down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, 7, you want a free ice cream, and like, all right. And people started just laughing and having fun. And the amount of money that they had, they didn't give away. I mean, they weren't giving away filet mignon, right? But it was just, people started cooperating with one another. It just lightened the mood. And I thought, what a courageous culture that person felt empowered that they could do that, right? They must have some parameters. So what we teach in the book of, if you really want to empower people, you have to talk about hard lines. Like, here's the things you can't mess with. Trader Joe's could not do anything that was going to mess with their food safety.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
So these are lines you can't cross. Here's the guidelines. And my guess is this manager had some level of discretion that said, you can give away up to X amount of product without getting in trouble. And then your lines, how would you want to do that? You're welcome to create our guidelines or create a fun atmosphere where people want to come to shop, probably. And
Yeah.
and with that, that's where you get good ideas.
You do, and people love it, and particularly, I think younger employees. Although I don't want to, I don't want to segregate by age because I'm sure older employees do as well. But when they get the chance to be their own person and show their creativity, I mean, I fly a lot, and I haven't really seen. There used to be back in the day, like you would go like on a Southwest flight, and like the flight attendant would get on the speaker and like do a rap or sing a song or do something. I haven't seen that in a while. Like I don't know if they're starting to really knuckle down on that kind of stuff, and people used to love that stuff. And then you also read and see sometimes there's the occasional social media person. I forget what brand it was, where some social media person for the brand just like went off, being really funny and silly, about one of their competitors.
Yeah.
And listen, I mean, like you said, I mean, the guy in Trader Joe's, I mean, people are taking a risk by doing that way. They could say the wrong thing, and particularly in this day and age, they could upset somebody, or whatever. But I think you're right. I mean, I think it's worth to have a courageous culture. I think you have to empower your employees, give them some, some leeway to do that kind of stuff. I think the upsides are better.
And look what happened, right? So they spent a little bit of money.
Yep.
Now they are written up in this book that people are reading all over the world which is free positive marketing, And so I think that part of creating a courageous culture is to say, people might come up with an idea and we're willing, as long as we give them the guidelines. I think where it could go south is if you don't give people the guidelines.
Right.
So, we were working with one company that actually called us in to help them rein it in a little bit.
Right.
So they had been so open, like do whatever you need to do to serve our clients, that they were running into compliance issues, like serious compliance issues.
Sure.
And so they're like, come help us create clarity about where when you can innovate, because they didn't want to shut it all down, but they needed to rein it back in. And so I think that's really what you've got to make sure that people understand the why behind your policies. And that it's interesting. We have a client right now who is in the food business, and they are doing an incredible job because so many things you can't do, like food safety, infant formula, right? You can't innovate in some of this stuff at all.
Yeah.
But they still want people's ideas, so that they're really clear. Like, here are the areas that we're not messing with this. You have no leeway whatsoever to do anything with this. But here is where we want ideas, and really reinforcing what appropriate risk taking looks like. And that comes to clarity. It's all part of the clarity bit.
Because when you don't do that, people will assume it's all one way. And so to really draw it out and say this yes, this no, and here you do you, that's why that's so critical.
And also, I think it's also important to say that people are going to make mistakes anyway. So you are still taking, even when you give people guidelines, I mean,
100%.
So you have to be flexible. And you say, like, if you're taking a risk, because the reward should outweigh the risk, but there could be a little bit of cost. And as a manager or an owner or leader, you have to accept that, and not freak out when somebody does say or do the wrong thing. It's just going to happen. And then you guys, go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead, David.
I was going to say, Gene, if I take that one step further, it's to not freak out as a good neutral, but then to embrace and reward risk is even better.
Yes.
And so if somebody tries something that doesn't work, but they were trying for the right reasons and in the right framework, good job. That one didn't work. What can we learn from that? And let's learn from that and apply it the next time around, so that we're still celebrating the attempt and the effort, and not just going, well, that didn't work. There's that kind of both and in there.
I agree. All right. So you guys have been amazing. This book is great. I only have a few minutes left because you've been very generous with your time. So, and again, for those of you guys listening and watching this, again, the book, and we'll go through where to get it and all of that in a minute. But one thing I did want to sort of like finish with, and I don't know which one of you guys want to take this, is you do write a lot about building an infrastructure for courage. I mean, in the end, that's what it's all about. and you give a bunch of steps. You recruit and you hire. You new additions experience the company as they arrive. I'm like reading out from my notes. You
Mhm.
compensate people well. You give people performance feedback. I actually want to hone in on the recruiting and the hiring
Mm.
because it's my biggest. I run a 10-person company. We have 600-700 clients, small and mid-sized businesses. And besides there being a serious labor shortage, we all suck at recruiting and hiring. I mean, we go through the resumes and the interviews. I'm 58 years old. I still don't know what I'm doing. And in the end, when like it comes time to like hire somebody, it's always like a leap of faith.
Yeah.
Give us, give us some advice. And I don't know which one of you guys want to take this for recruiting people, hiring people that you think will contribute to your infrastructure for courage. What do you look for?
So I would really, and it's interesting because actually a couple of our clients have me deeply involved in this with
Yeah.
them. So Nestle is one of our big clients,
Okay.
and they are doing an incredible job of building what I would call what they call a care and dare culture. We call it a courageous culture, but they read the book and they said, "Oh, we're going to build a care and dare culture. Can you help us with the daring part?"
Okay.
Right? And so what we did, the CHRO and I went and we looked at all of their interview questions and said, are these questions really tapping into the experiences of, so if risk taking is one of their behaviors they're trying to get, tell me about a time that you took a risk or something didn't work. What happened? What was the result? What did you do?
Yeah.
If you are looking for someone to be innovative, tell me about a time that you had the idea. So that's one way, is to really restructure the interview questions.
I got to
And then,
interrupt you, and I'm sorry, Karen.
yeah,
I apologize for doing that. Those are great questions to ask, and I'm asking you this as a business owner myself.
yeah,
Yeah.
I, I that is the kind of question before I have an interview, like the day before an interview, I would love to submit that question to the job candidate, and say, when you come in
mhm.
for the interview tomorrow, I'm going to be asking you this question or that question,
Hmm.
because it's such a, rather than put somebody on the spot and they have to think and scramble, whatever. I almost feel like, wouldn't it help to give this person a little bit of time to think about their response, to maybe remember a specific situation, give it some thoughts, so that when we do meet, they can talk about it, because I'm not interested in putting somebody on the spot. I'm interested
Right.
in what their answer is.
Yeah.
And I'm curious.
I think that it depends on the position.
Yeah.
If you
It's
need
true.
somebody who can really be articulate and think on their feet and is going to be representing you then I would not.
Yeah.
But if you are looking for an analytic, some role that you're an introvert is the perfect personality for this, then absolutely, I think that's a really good
Fair enough.
idea.
Fair
You
enough.
know,
Fair enough. I
yeah.
interrupt you and I apologize.
No, it's
And
good. And the other thing that I'm working on right now with one of our clients is they are having me. So they're in executive search now for a couple really senior roles, and they're actually having me help with the interview process. So it gets screened by the board, it gets screened by the CEO, and then it comes to me. I don't know all the technical. It's a very technical company. I'm not asking the technical
right.
questions. I'm seeing if they are really going to, if they have experience transforming culture. Can they build an infrastructure for courage? What has the experience been? And because at a senior level, it's not just it's not just your own leadership, it's how you're building that out for your whole organization.
Sure.
And it's been fascinating to me, it really does differentiate the candidates, quite frankly. And I think that what I really like about that is that they recognize the criticality of that for culture, because they've been spending a lot of time and energy to build this culture. And they know if they bring the wrong person in, it could take them backwards.
Yes.
And
Right.
so to prioritize that, if you're looking not just for the technical skills and not just for the leadership skills, but do you have somebody who can actually speak to what it takes to transform a culture?
Great answer. It is, and I have to tell you, I mean, to me, that is a topic of your next book, is recruiting and hiring and evaluating, because building your
Interesting.
team and your infrastructure is, to me, is one of the biggest issues that my clients and myself, that we're
Mhm.
facing. David, do you have anything to add to that?
What I was thinking about on the question of interviews and questions in advance and things, and I agree, it depends on the role and it depends on the question. uh, I'm a huge fan of those behavior-based interview questions and in the moment for the critical ones, because if it is this topic that you're talking about is critical to their job success and being a functioning part of their team or whatever it is, then you want to bump into them, and that's what pops out. So
Right.
if I'm hiring somebody to be incredibly empathic in tough customer situations, I want to be able to ask about a time they had a difficult encounter with a customer. What happened? Tell me about that. And that love for the customer just breathes out of them.
Sure. Sure.
And so those kinds of critical, some of the others I might in advance, but in the moment when we're trying to find out, people can't make up and make their way out of those kinds of, because you're asking about a real scenario, a real life thing. So the value in that, I think, is very much there for those kind of questions.
And then if you are a candidate, Google the company, look for their values, and be prepared to speak to those values and tell them about a time that you lived that value. I'm always shocked at how people aren't prepared to answer that question.
It's funny that you say that too, because I have not been on a job interview in like 25 years. If I was going to go on a job interview, not only would I be doing exactly that, Karen, but I would probably have 3 or 4 stories in my head. I've learned one thing from writing so many years is that you can pretty much conform and mold a story to answer any question that's
Lots of
been asked.
different, yeah.
You know, so if you have a couple of good stories where you really, sort of shined in the past, and can provide some details of that, and then just be ready to sort of be flexible with the story a little bit to make it, push it. I think it would help a candidate a lot.
Yeah, agreed.
I have been speaking with Karin Hurt and David Dye. They are the authors of Courageous Cultures: How to Build Teams of Microinnovators, Problem Solvers, and Customer Advocates. Karin, David, where do we reach you guys? Give us your website and your social handles so we have that on record and on the screen.
Our website is Let's Grow Leaders. And if you go there and you go to books, there's also a tab, courageousculturesbook.com, where you can get free sample chapters, the executive strategy guide. If you want to read it along as an executive team, you can get access to the idea incubator guide, a lot of additional tools that are nice companions if you're reading the book to begin to implement it. And as you're reading the book too, at the end of each chapter, it tells you something specific to do. So it's really is designed to be a step-by-step. Karin Hurt with an I on LinkedIn, as we've all talked about your name, David Dye.
With a Y.
With a Y this time,
Yes.
right? That's fine. Well, guys, thank you very much. It was a great conversation. The book is excellent. Highly recommend it to all of our listeners and to our viewers. I want to wish you best of success. I am guessing this will not be your last book. So when the next one comes out, I'm sure we will talk again. Fair enough?
Well, I have one that's due to the publisher in June, so I will take you up on that.
Why does that not surprise me? You've got a lot to write about on this topic, so I'm glad to hear it. Everybody, thanks for watching and listening. You've been watching and listening Biz Books. My name is Gene Marks. We will be back in just 2 weeks with another interview of a very good, experienced, and intelligent author of a great business book, just like Courageous Cultures. I want to appreciate that you have spent the time with us, and thank you for watching and listening. We will see you again soon. Take care.